Wealthy old men and broke teenagers have one thing in common. They're both essential for business. But this wealthy old guy did not give a damn about teenagers, and his mentality was slowly but surely killing Formula One. So how did this sport go from this teenage-hating, wealthy boomer to the success that it is today? You guys have clearly asked for it, so we are delivering. This is Company Forensics F1. Before we go on with the video, as much as we love making these YouTube videos, this is not what pays the bills and keeps the lights on. At Slidebean, we help companies raise capital by telling better stories. We can crawl the web to find investors for you, or we keep track of investor conversations. We help, of course, create slides for those investors. We help you run financial modeling. We help you keep track of your SaaS expenses. And all of this is part of our suite of tools called Slidebean, a tool for startups and founders that you can sign up for free at slidebean.com. I wasn't a huge racing fan, but I did love Drive to Survive. I mean, I'm not the only one. Tons of people now follow Formula One, and it's not by chance. But if you watched Formula One in the early 2010s, things weren't like this back then. In fact, it was pretty boring. It was the fastest sport on earth, and it was heaven for nerds and racing fans alike, but it was dull. It had no passion, and that's all thanks to Bernie Ecclestone. Ecclestone became a one-man empire that controlled anything and everything related to F1. He viewed F1 as a sport of numbers, and there's no denying his impact in this sport. Under his control, F1 became a global sport with races worldwide and millions of fans. It created the icons that we know today. And people respected Bernie. Ecclestone failed as a racing pilot, but was good at making money in real estate and selling bikes. And with a passion for racing, but no talent, he just chose to manage teams. And then he bought his own team, won many races, and hired some of the biggest names in Formula One during the 70s and 80s. His first team was so successful that he sold it for $5 million when he had purchased it for $120K. That's how good he was as a businessman. And then, of course, he would take this knowledge and then move up the ranks in F1. In 78, Ecclestone, along with Max Mosley, negotiated rights with the FIA, which, by the way, hated him, but they just couldn't keep him contained. Among the things that he controlled were, for example, the commercial and the distribution rights of Formula One. He knew that there was a massive potential there to make money and to keep the teams happy. Ecclestone leveraged TV rights that benefited both F1 as a sport and the racing teams. And of course, he also got a massive cut of these deals. And that's how he turned this small and niche sport into the global phenomenon of the 90s and the 2000s. But Ecclestone wasn't perfect. Ecclestone stirs the pot every now and then. He's not only shared laughs with controversial figures, but he just can't keep his mouth shut. And he was very emphatic on one thing.
If I was in charge of the world, I think I'd put Mr. Putin in charge of the world.
So this is this old school guy. He's 91 at the shooting of this video, but his recipe had worked for decades, and so he is a billionaire. But it's not like he cares about new and cool things. And that, unfortunately, showed. Ecclestone was a tyrant. He liked controlling communications, so it wasn't unusual for him to ask teams to delete this or to change that. But that's not all. The main man also insisted that drivers refrained from being too vocal on social media. Ecclestone hated social media. His audience was something else, and he wasn't wrong. Back then, 70-year-olds with a lot of money watched a lot of F1. At one point, only 14% of the F1 audience were below 25 years old. Plus, Ecclestone swore by TV and nothing else. But this had a major problem, and to better tell this story, who else than YouTube's Tomo?
F1 wasn't, the problem was it was very difficult for anyone other than, you know, the super hardcore fan who understood all of the nuance, all of the build up to the race, to jump on TV on a Sunday, watch the race and understand really what was going on.
So that's why from 2008 to 2016, F1 had lost 33% of its viewers. Plus, old millionaires, they tend to die quickly, but F1 had a lot of promise, and one company knew and understood this. Change is inevitable, even if it meant replacing Ecclestone. The purists loved what he had done, and after all, he had been there for 40 years. But he just couldn't beat time. In 2017, the ownership of Formula One Group finally exchanged hands. The new owner was Liberty Media. This is a giant that you've never heard of, but I bet that you know SiriusXM and the Atlanta Braves. Well, Liberty owns them, and now they own Formula One. And the price for this was $4.5 billion. That's, of course, a shit ton of money, but there is a lot of promise in this sport. The changing of the guard couldn't have been more evident and more quick. After 40 years, Ecclestone was no longer in Formula One, and Liberty gave him a role that he didn't even understand. But don't feel bad for him. Now, that wasn't the only immediate change. Liberty Media made it clear that things were going to be different now, even if fans weren't expecting much.
Oh, it's new ownership. Okay, I mean, there's maybe a lot more that F1 could be capable of, but I didn't realize, given where it is now in 2022, the potential for F1 was so much higher than even I thought it was going to be, especially amongst kind of a younger audience talking about it, because I was the only kid at school, like, I knew who was into F1 at all. It was all, it was everyone's dads and uncles. I didn't anticipate Liberty would have the impacts that it has, but it's been pretty incredible.
To much debate, they revamped the logo, they created a new theme for the sport, and they made it clear F1 would no longer be a sport. Now it's entertainment. So now let's give Ecclestone credit. He was right in one thing. Old fans were true fans, but there was nothing between them and those who didn't care about F1. There were no casual fans, and casual fans are worth big money, even if they're broke teenagers. And these fans watch short videos, they watch clips, other bits and pieces, but they won't watch an entire race. So Liberty Media understood the assignment, and it was what Ecclestone had done wrong all these years. Social media, understanding social media.
Right. Social media made me more of a fan because it really gave us that insight that we'd never had before. F1's a ridiculously complicated sport from a technical point of view, and that's completely ignoring the human, the driver experiences in the paddock, going to these different parts of the country, all mingling, the relationships between these drivers.
And this is, of course, what Liberty Media did and has been doing, but it's not a guessing game. They analyzed months of data and concluded that a short bit of content goes a long way, much more than a 2-hour race. And that means this. With more content every day, fans could now interact more. Liberty Media also educated the casual fan through data and history and personalities. So more and more, fans went from casual to much more than that. Formula One YouTube channel is one of the best out there. It's the perfect example of this Liberty Media's technological revolution. Every race has, and has always had, more than 90 cameras, 140 microphones, and this endless data stream. So it's as close as you can get. But then there was this big elephant in the room. Liberty Media tackled the one topic that Ecclestone hated, and it makes perfect sense. How are you not going to exploit profiles such as Lewis Hamilton? And it's not only about the big names. Social media allowed fans to feel closer to the other characters that didn't make the podium. Instead of borrowing their personal social media accounts, Liberty Media went crazy with it. And the question, who's behind the master plan? Well, there's this guy. This is Chase Carey. Epic mustache aside, Carey is this media genius with experience in giants like DirecTV. Liberty Media appointed him as CEO, and it was his vision, in part the one that revolutionized this sport, or entertainment channel. And then there's this guy. So Sean was all things commercial, but he took a step further, made enormous efforts to overhaul sponsors, and now these include crypto companies and even Google. And there are other changes as well. F1 had a new website packed with data and an app for diehard fans to pay and get more information about behind-the-scenes content. And for all of those who dreamt of being an F1 pilot but never had the chance, then there's e-racing. F1 has partnered with several companies to expand the F1 esports series, even hiring big names in the gaming industry. In 2021, this digital league saw record viewership with 23 million views, growing 103% from 2020. So there it is. In the Ecclestone era, Drive to Survive would have been impossible, but Liberty Media went there.
Action.
The docuseries revealed the drama engulfing F1, from near-death experiences to friendships and rivalries. This is unlike anything that we've seen in racing, and of course people love it. It introduced a whole bunch of new people to the sport. This series wasn't only about going fast, it showed us a human side that people loved, so the casual fan now had a reason to watch the race on Sundays. Drive to Survive was also vital in reaching the one market that had eluded Formula One for years, the US. This land was dominated by NASCAR and baseball, and they refused to embrace these seemingly elitist sport, but the documentary has begun to change that as well.
There's been a concerted effort from F1 in its past to try and capture the American audience, and it's seemingly always failed because there's clearly an appetite for There's obviously an appetite for motor racing in the USA. That's no question.
Since Drive to Survive premiered, viewership increased in the US and more fans enrolled in the Formula One app. In addition, viewership increased 56% in 2021 compared to 2020. To help this, Liberty Media has used this experience to draw in big names and to turn them into real fans. Liberty Media has been clear that they want to make every race and every event as big as the Super Bowl. And well, it's on its way to accomplishing that, honestly. And this, of course, leads to a question. Is this the right path? Sure, F1 has grown to overcome the senile attitude of the early 2010s, but its recipe has made it more successful than others. These are all the major sports that you can think of. And there it is. In the first place, Formula One. So, of course, those broke teenagers were, in the end, a goldmine. Of course, some purists, those old men that Bernie loved so much, might not be the biggest fans of where Formula One is heading today. It just might be too bold and, well, too young for them. But that's honestly perfect for the future.